The President aboarded Air Force One, whisked away from Sarasota, leaving some of his aides behind, sitting in a press room, absolutely as stunned and ashen-faced as all of us, looking at the live pictures, as disbelieving as any set of human beings could be. Jonathan.
Major Garrett in Washington. Carol?
Well, as Major just reported, help is on the way, at least financially, for the city of New York, as well as the recovery efforts in Washington, D.C. CNN's Garrick Utley is here with more on that. $40 billion can buy a lot of help, Garrick.
$40 billion will be very important for the city of New York because the impact, the financial and economic impact of what happened in Lower Manhattan on Tuesday, the scene we see right here, that's going to be very, very heavy, very, very painful, particularly because it comes at a time when the economy here has been slowing as it has been elsewhere across the country. Looking forward to this Friday, of course, as you mentioned, one of the big events will be the visit by President Bush. And what is unusual is that the security measures are understandably very tight. No details from the White House as to where he's going to go, at what time he's going to be there, what his movements are going to be. He's going to come. He will be expected to visit the site down there. He'll attend a prayer service before returning to Washington. As far as the rescue effort is concerned, it was interrupted in the early morning hours because of very heavy rain and electrical storm that moved across Manhattan Island, but the work now has been resumed. Unfortunately, on Thursday, no survivors were found, but the search will continue, of course, through Friday. In New York these days, we're really hearing two kinds of talk on the street, if you will. One, of course, is the grieving, the pain of what happened on Tuesday. The other is what happens now, a very pointed and very important question, which brings us to the name of Osama bin Laden, the name on everyone's lips. Secretary of State Powell has, in effect, fingered bin Laden as the prime suspect. He's the world's most wanted man today. But how much do we really know about him? That is to say, who he is, where he is, and what it is he really wants.
The who is the easiest answer. Osama bin Laden is 44, a millionaire born in Saudi Arabia who has used his wealth to finance terror to fulfill his crusade against the United States. The where of bin Laden is mainly Afghanistan, where he built his terrorist camps. The Taliban regime there, which has sheltered bin Laden, has imposed its version and vision of Islam on Afghanistan. Women can work only in health and education fields and have few rights. There is a ban on using the internet and on importing movies, musical instruments, and even playing cards. Western aid workers have been put on trial, charged with the crime of preaching Christianity. In March, the Taliban blew up a pair of 2,000-year-old statues of Buddha, despite international appeals to save the treasures that had no place in the purist Islamic society the Taliban are trying to build. If bin Laden and the Taliban have much in common, bin Laden is more engaged in backing fellow Arabs in their conflict with Israel, which is backed by the United States, and in attacking the leaders of his homeland, Saudi Arabia, whom he sees as the materialistic pawns of a militaristic United States, which has stationed its troops there. And so it is the United States that has become, in Osama bin Laden's eyes, the evil enemy that needs to be cut down in size and power. Literally, brutally cut down.
And there's also something else very important that makes Osama bin Laden different from other terrorists. Terrorism usually is used to achieve some tangible goal, land, power, political recognition. Not so with bin Laden. He's not asking the United States for anything. He just wants to inflict pain, pure and simple, for the reasons we just saw. And that's likely to continue until one day, in some way, something is done about him and it. Back to you now in Atlanta.
Garrick, I'm going to tap your years of experience here as a journalist. It's not unheard of for government officials to use the airwaves to send messages to suspects such as Osama bin Laden. How much technology does he have access to? Do you think that he is monitoring the coverage here around the world? And do you think the United States investigators are trying to send a message in order to flush him out?
Very interesting question, because we know that he loves cell phones. He uses cell phones all the time, and I'm sure the intelligence agencies have been trying to intercept those conversations. However, he is in Afghanistan. Now, the official policy there in this purist Islamic state run by the Taliban regime is that satellite dishes are not allowed. People are not allowed to use the internet. They're not supposed to watch television or even movies. There's an import ban on those. So theoretically, or according to the law of Afghanistan, the government there is protecting him, sheltering him. He couldn't hear what's going on here. However, I would well suspect that he has certain privileges, and no doubt he has a satellite dish there, and no doubt he is probably glued to CNN, perhaps even as we speak right now. Carol?
Perhaps. Thank you very much. Garrick Utley reporting live from New York. Well, we were just talking about Osama bin Laden and some strong statements out of Afghanistan this morning. You know, the United States Secretary of State has been the first in the Bush administration to officially point the finger at Osama bin Laden. He is, of course, on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and the Taliban in Afghanistan is giving him safe haven. CNN's Tom Mentir is across the border in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. Pakistan obviously might be critical to any sort of retaliation, Tom, but when it does come to any military action, the Taliban is issuing a warning to Americans today.
They actually did issue a warning, Carol, and as Garrick was talking about, the toys, the cell phones, the satellite phones, the internet, things like that, these are all things that the Taliban says they've taken away from Osama bin Laden, that he no longer has access to these tools of his. They've been taken away, according to the Taliban, if you believe what they say. Now, this morning at the Taliban embassy here in Islamabad, a message was sent out from Mullah Omar, and this was a message that they were not involved. They did not have the ability to train pilots in Afghanistan. No pilots from Afghanistan were involved in this operation. They say they condemn terrorism, and they also issued a warning to the United States that they must do a full investigation. They must not just consider Osama bin Laden's reputation in making a decision to strike Afghanistan.
I don't expect the Americans to take such urgent and action without any evidence, because we have condemned this terrorist act, and all the world condemned it as we condemned it. If the Americans attacked Afghanistan without any evidence, it would mean that America is committing terrorism itself.
There have been no indications that the Taliban is ready or willing to hand Osama bin Laden over to authorities, but they have said in private conversations that if credible evidence is provided to Afghanistan and the Taliban, they would consider having him tried in an Islamic country, something that probably would not sit well in the United States. There has been pressure brought against Pakistan, both through the front door and the back door, to cooperate. The president of Pakistan has indicated that full cooperation will be given to the United States on this issue in dealing with its investigation. They will provide some support. Now, one thing that the United States has asked for is the use of Pakistani airspace if a military operation is launched, an air campaign, shall you say, against Afghanistan. This might cause some problems domestically for the Pakistani president, because he is not a politician, he is a military leader, and it could be a real problem domestically if indeed these airstrikes are launched with the implicit cooperation of the Pakistani military government. So there is a lot going on behind the scenes. There has been meetings going on all day by the military here in Pakistan, deciding how much probably assistance should be offered to the United States. Carol?
All right, thank you very much. Tom Mentir reporting live from Islamabad, Pakistan. Jonathan, I think you've got some breaking news.
Indeed, we're just into CNN coming from the Reuters news agency from the Pentagon, where apparently in the rubble they have found, amidst the crush of steel and cement, the black boxes of the jet that crashed into the building, killing an estimated 190 people. Authorities have been looking for the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder from that flight, hoping to gain more clues about the people that brought it down and what their intentions were. Now word once again from the Reuters news agency that the black boxes have been found. CNN's Mark Potter is at the Pentagon, and we're expecting to hear from him soon. Carol?
All right, and while we wait for Mark Potter to gather more information on that, I want to pick up the threads from what we were just talking about in terms of Osama bin Laden and what Tom Mentir was saying in terms of how much access he might have, according to the Taliban, to the tools necessary to execute such a terrorist attack. And the next question we want to focus on here is, can the people of Afghanistan be separated from their ruling government's relationship with this known terrorist? We're going to go to Dominic Nutt for some answers. He spent the last 5 weeks in Afghanistan working for a group called Christian Aid, and he joins us this morning from London. Good morning, Dominic. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Good morning.
What
no problem.
what can you tell us about what the people of Afghanistan know about the attack on the United States?
I can tell you that 90% of the people in Afghanistan live in isolated rural villages, and their boundaries are the mountains that surround their communities. They don't have radios, they don't have televisions, they don't have newspapers. They will not have ever even heard of the World Trade Center or even New York. I promise you, these people have no idea what's happened about the victims in America, and I can tell you their hearts will bleed when they find out.
Then what do they know about Osama bin Laden?
I suspect they probably know a little about who he is or what he is, but really it's not something they particularly talk about. They don't even talk about the Taliban. All they're concerned about is that there's been a 3-year drought in Afghanistan. People are down to the last few days of food. When I was leaving, I promise you their biggest concern at the moment is how to keep themselves and their families alive. The graveyards are already filling up in the mountain villages. Their biggest concern now is for the lives of their families.
So what you're saying is they really don't know anything about the relationship between the Taliban and Osama bin Laden. They don't really know what his reputation is, what he's been accused of. There are no standing loyalties to Osama bin Laden amongst the people that you have worked with in Afghanistan.
Well, if I hear you correctly, in the cities, more people will know more about Osama bin Laden. They don't really sympathise with him. They don't sympathise with the Taliban, by and large. They really are a minority sort of regime. But the vast majority of Afghans don't live in the cities. It's a medieval society. Mm-hmm. They really have no form of communication. They will not really know anything about this man. They will have no feelings for him, no comradeship with this man. That is my strong impression.
Thank you, Dominic. Well, then let me ask you this about the Taliban's statement this morning. They say that there are no planes in Afghanistan, there are no places where Osama bin Laden's lieutenants could train pilots, that he or his people, his followers there, have not had access to any kind of communications, satellite phones, cell phones, etc., that it would be impossible for Osama bin Laden to actually execute this sort of planning.
Well, to be honest, my understanding of the Taliban, or my impression of the Taliban, which is not very deep, is that it's a fairly inefficient, shambolic organisation. Whether they really know what they're talking about half the time, I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if this was true. It wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't true. All I know is that it's not a regime. It's not a completely consistent regime. Mm-hmm. It's almost a system of fiefdoms. Isolated organisations, Taliban power areas in one area, less power in another area. Kabul and Herat might not be in communication. One area from another might not be in communication. So really, you take what they say and mm-hmm. you wonder whether they actually know what they're talking about.
But you know what they're also saying, Dominic, is that if there is any sort of military action, a retaliatory strike in Afghanistan, that innocent people will lose their lives, and that any sort of retaliation would only add to the misery of people who live in Afghanistan.
Well, I would agree with that, and I would go further. We've got, according to the UN, when I was there, there's 5.5 million people who are about to suffer, who are about to go over the edge into starvation, and that was when aid agencies were still there, when they were working, and they pulled out yesterday. There's no food getting in, and that is a direct result of this threat of military action. So over and above any bombing and any casualties for bombing, we now have a quarter of the population being held ransom. Now, I understand the reasons why the US and its allies feel that is necessary, but enough innocent civilians have died in America, and we've had messages from Afghanistan expressing the deepest sadness for what's happened. But please, I would say we do not need any more deaths of innocent civilians who know nothing about the plight of American people.
Dominic Nutt with Christian Aid, thank you very much for sharing your perspective. Sometimes it is difficult to separate people from politics. Jonathan?
And we're now in a position to confirm that in an investigation that stretches all the way around the world, some promising progress here in the United States, the discovery and retrieval of the black boxes from the rubble at the Pentagon. CNN's Bob Franken joins us now with more on the story. Bob?
Good morning, John. Pentagon sources confirm that they are about to put out a news release saying that overnight the black boxes, those are the ones that record data and voice information, on the American Airlines 757, which crashed into the Pentagon, causing such a calamity. The black boxes have now been discovered overnight. We had reported yesterday afternoon that officials had heard